Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Mondays with Mundy. That's me, Jim Mundy, the historian for the Union League Legacy Foundation. This episode, the last one of 2021, is being broadcast on December 27th because that, I believe, is the most important date in Union League history. And of course, there's a story behind it. So why don't we find out why? All right. So, but a little back in time before we go deep in the weeds. So in the fall of 1862, things were looking pretty good, finally, for the Union. The Union Army had won the Battle of Antietam on September the 17th, allowing Abraham Lincoln to issue a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation 5 days later on September 22nd. And, Lincoln told the Confederacy, have between now and January the 1st to free the slaves, or I will do it for you, which he did. But of course, the Confederacy ignored him. But nonetheless, at least now everybody knew what the war really was all about, and that was ending slavery. But in the meantime, things were still a little rough and tumble in Philadelphia, which was at that point a southern city in many, many different ways, and had a very large contingent of Democratic citizens who were pro-Confederacy and pro-slavery itself. So there was this conflict that had been around, actually for decades. I mean, the Civil War was just the culmination of all of this conflict. So on early November, as we've seen, Hare and Boker were walking on South 7th Street. And let's take a look at it through a slideshow. Okay, slideshow. All right, come on, slideshow. All right, from the beginning, voila. All right, gentlemen in crisis, because that's what they were. And some of you may recognize this as the title of Max Whiteman's 1975 history on the Union League, first one to be published since 1902. All right, so here we have the street scene on South 7th Street in front of Forney's Press, which, by the way, John W. Forney, who was at that point the Secretary of the United States Senate, would become one of the founding members of the Union League. So here we have our protagonist, if you will. On the left, John Hare, on the right, George Boker. Hare, his father, Robert, was a professor of chemistry at the University of Pennsylvania, came from a fairly wealthy and well-to-do background, educated, obviously. One of the city's great jurists in the mid-19th century, legal author as well, but pro-Union, pro-Lincoln. On the right-hand side, George Boker. You may remember from an episode just a few weeks ago when we talked about Boker himself. So Boker also came from a very, very well-off family. And Boker, even though he passed the bar at his father's wishes, did not practice law. Instead, he became a poet, author, playwright, and sonneteer, and would become the first secretary of the League, and therefore, through his writing, the heart and soul of the League itself. So these are the two men who met on South 7th Street. And the first thing they did was, well, it's not the first thing, but before we get to that, these are two quotes from George Boker. And it gives you some idea, though, of just what things were like in Philadelphia at that time. So let's read them. At no period in the struggle was the patriotic spirit so low, or the spirit of the traitors so insultingly hopeful. So clearly, Philadelphia is a divided city. Our secret foes had emerged from their seclusion, taking their wonted social places and boasting to their foreign visitors that, in what was called unmixed society, they ordered matters, and that all gentlemen would soon be of their way of thinking. So clearly, the pro-Confederate Democratic citizens of Philadelphia seemed to hold the upper hand at this point in time. Right. So Judge Hare had to leave, but George Boker went to the office of a like-minded citizen and personal friend, Morton McMichael, and that is he on the left. McMichael was sheriff of Philadelphia in the 1840s, but in the 1850s purchased the North American and United States Gazette newspaper, and so he's now a newspaper publisher and using it to promote his pro-Union and pro-Lincoln opinions. So McMichael was incredibly supportive of this idea of creating some kind of a patriotic society that would be, supporting Union and Lincoln. And they began making up a list of men they would invite to join this very small, select group in the beginning. And while they were doing that, in walked Benjamin Gerhardt, the gentleman on the left-hand side. Benjamin Gerhardt was a lawyer, legal author, one of the most prominent Episcopal laymen in the city at the time, but also the provost marshal for Philadelphia, responsible for managing the military draft in the city. So a man who was very much engaged in what was going on in Philadelphia at the time. And Gerhardt was absolutely in favor of this idea of creating this patriotic society. And he actually invited them to come to his house for their first meeting. And that is his house on the right-hand side, 226 South 4th Street. And by the way, it is still there. So that's where they had their first meeting on November the 15th of 1862. They didn't even have a name for themselves yet. That would come the next meeting. But now at least they're meeting and they're getting together and they're sharing ideas and enthusiasms. So the next meeting took place at the home of George Boker at 1720 Walnut Street. And on the left-hand side, you can see this brownstone building. There were actually two townhouses, and Boker lived on the right-hand side. Left-hand side was occupied by Bloomfield Moore, who would become a founding member of the League himself in just a few weeks' time. Now, that night, they selected the name the Union Club of Philadelphia, and they wrote and approved their first set of Articles of Association. They're still fairly simple because at this point, they're just getting started. But you can see the articles on the right-hand side. All right, so they would have a meeting at the home of Bloomfield Moore himself, as you can see, on December the 13th of 1862, but they're so organized, or at least organized at this point, where they have pre-printed invitations, which shows you how organized they were. And so there's Mr. Moore on the left-hand side. And so Mr. Bloomfield Moore requests the pleasure of Mr. Ferdinand Dreer's company on Saturday evening next at 8 o'clock punctually, December 13th, 1862. All right. So now they're really building up momentum and they're building up some steam. Actually, this was becoming so successful and so popular with so many men in attendance that they had to limit it because after all, these are private homes and they weren't built for mass meetings. So 2 weeks later, on the 27th, at the home of Dr. John Forsyth Meggs, and that is he on the right-hand side. Now, Meggs at this point was the city's leading pediatrician and probably one of the country's leading pediatricians as well. Now, Meggs didn't have his own pre-printed invitations, but rather this handwritten one. And you can see at the very top, Union Club, Dr. J. Forsyth Meggs requests the pleasure of Mr. Ferdinand Dreer's company on Saturday evening at 8 o'clock, December 27th, 1862. And that will become the most important date in Union League history, and that is Dr. Meggs' house at 1208 Walnut Street. The building itself is no longer there. It's been replaced by something newer, if you will, but the address is still there, so we know where this meeting took place. And so at this meeting, there were approximately 50 gentlemen, if that many, and these men would become the two main combatants, if that's the appropriate word for that meeting, because it didn't go as smoothly as they had hoped. Charles Gibbons on the left-hand side was the founder of the Republican Party in Philadelphia in 1854. He'd been a Whig before that, but he converted to Republicanism. He was a lawyer, an abolitionist, a former state senator, and one of Abraham Lincoln's most vociferous supporters in the city of Philadelphia. On the right-hand side, Daniel Doherty, Irish Catholic, which makes him different automatically than most people there, a lawyer, but known as one of the city's greatest orators. And Doherty, though, was a Democrat. And Doherty had been attending these meetings for a while. So what's going to happen next? All right. Charles Gibbons wrote the draft of the Articles of Association that were read to the company that night. And these are copies of the original articles that we still have in the archival collection. So this is Gibbons' handwriting. And I would suggest you look at the left-hand side and the upper half of it at least, because that's where we're going to go next in this story. But you can also see that something's missing, something's been cut out. So let's get to that part of the story itself. But in the meantime, do look, as you can see that on the right-hand bottom side, you see many, many signatures. All right, and eventually 253 men would sign these Articles of Association. But let's get to the story. And let's read what it says. So this is how it started. The undersigned agreed to associate under the name of the Union Club of Philadelphia. And you can see that club was crossed out and replaced by League. We'll talk about that in a minute. And to adopt the following fundamental Articles of Association, to wit: the condition of membership shall be unqualified loyalty to the government of the United States and unwavering support of the suppression of the rebellion. So what was cut out? What do you think? How about Republican Party? And that would make sense because these men were absolutely the most engaged Republicans in the city at this point, shall we say. All right. I mean, and they thought they were all there to support Lincoln and the Union. But when Gibbons read this, and he mentioned the words Republican Party, Dougherty is reported to have basically jumped up from his chair and said, "Not for me, not for me. I'm not for any Republican president. I am for my country." And with that, the proverbial all hell broke loose. Boker was muttering things under his breath, as were many other members present. And Dougherty was having a hard time defending himself. But into the fray steps John Hare, the calm, collected, intelligent and thoughtful lawyer, judge, who basically said, "Gentlemen, while he could agree with the sentiments of Charles Gibbons and the Republican Party, he also thought that Mr. Dougherty was right, and that if the Union League were to become nothing more than a Republican political party association, that it would fail, because they needed all patriotic citizens of Philadelphia, Republicans and Democrats, to join in this effort to save the Union and save their country." And so it was that Judge Hare carried the meeting, developed a consensus. And so with that, they cut the words Republican Party out of the Articles of Association. And the Union League would get its start as that patriotic social society we had mentioned earlier. So, all right. So that was the drama that took place on December 27th of 1862. That is the official organizing date for the Union League itself. So now the Union Club would continue to meet every Saturday evening for the rest of the war through the summer of 1865. And after that, when they realized that they didn't need to, they simply decided to meet once a year at a dinner in December. And when they did, and they continued to do that until the last dinner was held in early December of 1906. So that is the story of December 27th of 1862. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. And I hope this encourages you to read more Union League history, because it's really, really worth it. So on that note, I wish everyone a happy end of the year, a relaxing and enjoyable New Year's. Maybe we'll see you at the League on January the 1st. All right. So in the meantime, everybody, thank you for watching these episodes all this year. So stay well, stay safe, and thanks very much. Goodbye.